You're listening to Big World Network.
Phineas Frakture and the Princess of Atlantis, Episode 2. Written by Joseph Gatch. Read by Michael Young. The cold Atlantic air was filled with screams of passengers fighting for places in the lifeboats. The majority of the people were rushing to the front of the airship, where there were fewer tentacles wrapping themselves around the Zeppelin. Phineas and William, however, were running along the starboard side, heading towards the rear of the ship, where there was a lesser chance of a flailing tentacle accosting them the closer they got to the main body. They found an unattended lifeboat and stood guard, waiting for Abigail. Watching the throng of passengers trying to cram themselves into lifeboats became too much for Phineas to bear. He began running towards the front of the ship, waving his arms and shouting to people, "Back here! There are plenty of boats in the stern!" However, those that did hear him were fixated on the giant eye of the beast, which could be seen beyond the stern. A tentacle wrapped itself around one of the lifeboats and ripped it from the ship's hull, taking over 20 passengers with it. "Phineas!" Abigail's voice cut through the screams. "Come on!" She shoved the bags into his arms and started running towards William. Phineas hesitantly looked at the mass of passengers, catching the eye of a small girl who was pulling against her mother's grip and seemingly reaching out for Phineas's help at the same time. Her mother, however, was intent on fighting her way into one of the lifeboats and pulled her daughter along with her. Phineas held out his hand as if he could grab the girls from that distance and pull her to safety. However, the girl disappeared into the mob, and reluctantly Phineas dropped his hand and turned to follow Abigail. When they reached the boat, they both unceremoniously threw the belongings inside. "They never listen," Phineas said under his breath. "Do you know how one of these things works?" asked William. Phineas stopped as he was swinging his leg over the side. "No. Do you?" "Oh, please," said Abigail as she pushed both men into the boat. "You two are pathetic." The female pilot mechanic sliced the remaining ropes with a knife and then jumped in herself. "Hit that winch lever," she commanded William. With a quick pull, the boat was suddenly released from the side, and they began to plummet from the airship. "This seems like a bad idea," shouted William against the rushing air, as he and Phineas held on for dear life, and the scene above them receded. Abigail calmly reached over to a valve mounted on a box in the center of the boat, and turned it. A quick whoosh of air pushed open the box, and a large canvas bag inflated above them. The boat jerked quickly as their descent stopped. Suddenly, Abigail began laughing hysterically. "You should see the looks on your faces," she said, gasping for air. "You're whiter than ghosts." "I don't find that the least bit amusing," said Phineas. "Nor do I," agreed William. "Would you look at that?" exclaimed Abigail, looking up at the airship. "That thing is huge!" Above, the air kraken had wrapped itself around the ship and was constricting it in its throes of passion. Explosions began detonating around the ship as boilers went critical and the gas bags in the mighty envelope ignited. They could see several other lifeboats drifting away from the scene, as well as those unfortunate enough not to escape, falling to their deaths. In the distance, Phineas thought he heard the report of a large gun being fired from one of the boats. Apparently, the big game hunter had found his way off the ship and was on an aerial safari. Wrong move, Phineas thought, as one of the giant tentacles lashed out and easily swatted the offending lifeboat from the sky. The trio watched in horror, hearing the screams of the falling passengers as they dropped to the icy waters below. The other boats began to turn away from the falling wreckage. Likewise, Abigail stoked the small furnace that powered the propeller, and soon the boiler had enough pressure to give them motion. "What do we do now?" queried William. "And do we have enough food to make it to land?" "Always thinking with your stomach," said Phineas. He took out his notebook and pencil and began scribbling out calculations. "This is just an estimate, but if we don't catch a headwind, we should make it to shore in 5 days. "New York in 5 days? I think that we can manage," William said cheerily. "No, England or Portugal. New York would take about 10. A mournful wail echoed across the overcast sky. "Do you think he's satisfied?" asked William, eyeing the Kraken suspiciously. "Would you be if your chosen mate exploded in your grasp?" Abigail replied. "I guess not. But if that thing is attracted to an airship because it looks like an air kraken, wouldn't it stand to reason that these lifeboats look like smaller ones?" All three looked up at each other and then up at the gas bag. "He has a point," stated Phineas. "I suggest that we get this boat moving with all possible haste." "I agree." Abigail pulled out her tool pouch and her luggage and began tinkering with the engine. Phineas also made a few adjustments while William kept watch. There was a slight whine from the screw as the propeller increased speed. "That does it," Abigail said proudly. "What you have just witnessed, gentlemen, was the fine art of female ingenuity. That should cut a few hours off our journey at least." "Bravo!" clapped William. "I can see that I chose the right party to abandon ship with. Although the kitchen staff might have been a wiser choice in the long run, I couldn't possibly— oh dear." He dropped off in mid-sentence, and his eyes widened with terror. "It's coming straight for us!" Phineas and Abigail turned to see the hulking behemoth diving from above, tentacles streaming behind it like the tails on a box kite. The Kraken was upon them before they could blink an eye. The massive form passed them mere feet away, and they watched in fear as it went by. It seemed to take an eternity for the beast to descend. "Well, that was close," William said all too soon. The final tentacle, one of the largest, snapped around the balloon and jerked it with terrifying speed. As the occupants held on once again, someone, or all, started screaming. Phineas wasn't sure which. The last thing he remembered, though, was the mighty splash as the air kraken returned to the ocean from whence it came. Then they too were dragged down into the murky depths.
You're listening to Big World Network.